On February 8, 1944, at exactly 10:05 a.m., a formation of 5 B-17 flying fortresses from the 8th Air Force's 303rd Bomb Group found themselves in a desperate battle for survival over the skies of Germany. Led by Captain Louis P. Fenton, the squadron had been tasked with a high-priority bombing mission to target the German aircraft factory in Leipzig. As they approached the target, the B-17s were suddenly ambushed by a swarm of 60 Luftwaffe fighters, including the deadly Me-109 and FW-190. The odds were overwhelmingly against the American bombers, with each B-17 facing off against a dozen or more enemy fighters. The crew of the lead B-17, Misfortune, held their breath as the first wave of German fighters closed in. The bombers' gunners, manning the .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, unleashed a withering field of fire that ripped through the enemy planes. But despite their valiant efforts, the sheer number of attackers began to take its toll. One by one, the B-17 started to fall, their engines ablaze or their control surfaces shredded by the relentless barrage of cannon fire and machine gun bullets. As the situation grew more desperate, Captain Fenton made a split-second decision that would change the course of the battle. He ordered his squadron to form a tight defensive circle, with each B-17 providing covering fire for its neighboring planes. This tactic, known as the combat box, allowed the gunners to concentrate their firepower on the most vulnerable areas of the enemy fighters, while also protecting the bombers' own flanks and rear. The German pilots, who had been expecting an easy kill, were caught off guard by the sudden change in tactics. They had never faced American bombers that were so tightly grouped and mutually supportive. As the Luftwaffe fighters pressed their attack, they found themselves being torn apart by the withering crossfire from the B-17s. The Me-109s and FW-190s were no match for the combined firepower of the 5 bombers, and they began to fall from the sky in flames. But just as it seemed that the Americans had gained the upper hand, disaster struck. The B-17 Misfortune took a direct hit from a German cannon shell, which severed the plane's hydraulic lines and left it precariously close to crashing. With the bomber's control surfaces failing, Captain Fenton had to think fast to save his crew. He ordered his co-pilot to take the controls while he grabbed a fire extinguisher to put out the flames that were spreading rapidly through the plane's fuselage. As the battle raged on, the remaining B-17s continued to fight for their lives. The gunners were running low on ammunition, and the planes were taking damage from all sides. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of P-51 Mustangs from the 354th Fighter Group appeared on the scene, having been dispatched to provide escort for the bombers. The American fighters dove into the fray, chasing off the remaining Luftwaffe planes and giving the B-17s a much-needed respite. With the enemy fighters repelled, the battered B-17s limped back to their base in England, their crews exhausted but exhilarated by their narrow escape. The mission had been a success, with the German aircraft factory suffering significant damage. But more importantly, the bravery and quick thinking of Captain Fenton and his crew had saved the lives of countless airmen, and had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the American bomber crews could hold their own against the best the Luftwaffe had to offer. As the news of the battle spread, it became clear that this had been no ordinary dogfight. The 5 B-17s had single-handedly defeated a force of 60 enemy fighters, a feat that would go down in history as one of the most remarkable examples of aerial combat in World War II. The story of Captain Fenton and his crew serves as a testament to the bravery and ingenuity of the men who flew the B-17, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for victory against overwhelming odds. The B-17 Flying Fortress, with its rugged design and formidable defensive armament, had once again proven itself to be a formidable opponent in the skies of Europe. The Me-109 and FW-190, on the other hand, had been outgunned and outmaneuvered by the American bombers. The battle was a significant turning point in the war, as it marked a shift in the balance of power in favor of the Allies. The Luftwaffe would never again be able to match the strength and determination of the American bomber crews, and the stage was set for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. In the end, it was not just the bravery of the airmen that had decided the outcome of the battle, but also the superior tactics and training of the American crews. The combat box formation, which had been developed by the U.S. Army Air Forces, had proven itself to be a highly effective way to defend against enemy fighters. The use of the M2 Browning machine gun, with its high rate of fire and heavy caliber, had also been a key factor in the success of the B-17s. As the war drew to a close, the legend of the B-17 and its heroic crews would live on, inspiring future generations of airmen to follow in their footsteps. The aftermath of the battle was met with a mix of relief and jubilation at the American airbase in England. Captain Fenton and his crew were hailed as heroes, their bravery and quick thinking in the face of overwhelming odds inspiring their fellow airmen. The news of the battle spread like wildfire, with reporters and photographers flocking to the base to capture the story of the 5 B-17s that had single-handedly defeated a force of 60 enemy fighters. As the crew of the Misfortune tended to their damaged plane, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had faced down the enemy and emerged victorious, their bond and training proving to be the decisive factors in the battle. But amidst the celebration, there were also concerns about the cost of the mission. The Misfortune had taken significant damage, and it would require extensive repairs before it could be deemed airworthy again. The crew had also suffered injuries, with one of the gunners being hospitalized for a severe wound to his leg. As the days passed, the crew of the Misfortune worked tirelessly to repair their plane, knowing that they would be needed again soon to support the Allied war effort. The Luftwaffe had been dealt a significant blow, but it was far from defeated, and the Americans knew that they would have to be ready to face them again soon. Meanwhile, Captain Fenton was summoned to the office of General Doolittle, the commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces in Europe. The general was a tall, imposing figure with a stern expression, but as he greeted Captain Fenton, a hint of a smile played on his lips. "Captain, I've heard a lot about your crew's heroics in the recent battle," he said, his voice firm but friendly. "I must say, I'm impressed. The combat box formation and the use of the M2 Browning machine gun proved to be a winning combination. But I'm afraid the war is far from over, and we'll need to be ready to face the Luftwaffe again soon." Captain Fenton nodded, his mind racing with the implications of the general's words. He knew that the Luftwaffe would not take the defeat lightly, and that they would be looking for revenge. "Sir, what's the plan for our next mission?" he asked, his voice firm and confident. General Doolittle leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We've received intelligence that the Germans are planning to launch a major counterattack against our forces in France," he said. "We'll need to provide air support to our ground troops, and that's where your crew comes in. You'll be leading a formation of B-17s on a bombing mission deep into enemy territory." Captain Fenton's heart skipped a beat as he listened to the general's words. He knew that the mission would be fraught with danger, but he also knew that his crew was up to the task. They had faced down the enemy before, and they would do it again. "Sir, we're ready when you are," he said, his voice firm and resolute. General Doolittle nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I knew I could count on you, Captain," he said. "You and your crew have proven yourselves to be one of the best in the business. Now let's get to work and plan this mission." As Captain Fenton left the general's office, he felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but he also knew that his crew was ready for whatever challenges lay in store. They had faced down the enemy before, and they would do it again. The question was, what would the next mission bring? Would they be able to overcome the odds and emerge victorious once more, or would they succumb to the dangers of war? Only time would tell. The days that followed were a blur of activity as the crew of the Misfortune worked tirelessly to prepare for their next mission. They spent long hours in the briefing room, poring over maps and intelligence reports, planning every detail of the bombing run. They practiced their tactics, honing their skills and perfecting their technique. And they worked on their plane, repairing the damage from the previous mission and making sure that it was airworthy again. As the day of the mission approached, the tension began to build. The crew of the Misfortune knew that they would be facing a formidable enemy, and that the stakes would be high. But they were ready, their training and experience having prepared them for the challenges that lay ahead. As they climbed into their plane and prepared for takeoff, Captain Fenton felt a sense of pride and confidence. He knew that his crew was the best, and that they would get the job done. The question was, what would they face when they reached their target? Would they be met with fierce resistance, or would they be able to complete their mission without incident? The answer, like so much in war, was uncertain. But one thing was clear: the crew of Misfortune would face whatever lay ahead with courage, determination, and a fierce commitment to their mission. As the B-17s lumbered down the runway and lifted into the air, Captain Fenton felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. They were off, bound for enemy territory and a destination that would test their skills and their resolve. The Luftwaffe would be waiting for them, eager to exact revenge for their previous defeat. But Captain Fenton was not afraid. He knew that his crew was ready and that they would face whatever challenges lay ahead with bravery and determination. The battle ahead would be fierce, but the crew of Misfortune was ready. They would face the enemy with courage and honor, and they would emerge victorious. The question was, at what cost? The war was far from over, and the crew of Misfortune would have to face many more challenges before the final victory. But for now, they were ready, their spirits high and their hearts full of hope. They would fly into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they would emerge victorious. The fate of the war, and the fate of the world, hung in the balance. But the crew of Misfortune was ready, their courage and determination a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. As the B-17s disappeared into the distance, the people on the ground watched with a mix of awe and trepidation. They knew that the war was far from over, and that the crew of Misfortune would face many more challenges before the final victory. But they also knew that the crew was ready, their bravery and determination a source of inspiration to all who knew them. The battle ahead would be fierce, but the crew of Misfortune would face it with courage and honor. They would fly into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they would emerge victorious. The fate of the war, and the fate of the world, hung in the balance. But the crew of Misfortune was ready, their hearts full of hope and their spirits high. They would face whatever lay ahead, and they would emerge victorious. The question was, what would the future hold? Would the crew of Misfortune be able to overcome the challenges that lay ahead, or would they succumb to the dangers of war? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: the crew of Misfortune would face whatever lay ahead with courage, determination, and a fierce commitment to their mission. They would fly into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they would emerge victorious. The war would be won, and the world would be free from the tyranny of the enemy. The crew of Misfortune would play a crucial role in the final victory, their bravery and determination inspiring generations to come. And as the B-17s disappeared into the distance, the people on the ground knew that they would always remember the crew of Misfortune, their courage and honor a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. The sound of the B-17s faded into the distance, leaving behind a sense of anticipation and uncertainty. The crew of Misfortune had flown off into the unknown, their fate hanging in the balance. But one thing was certain: they would face whatever lay ahead with courage, determination, and a fierce commitment to their mission. They would fly into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they would emerge victorious. The war would be won, and the world would be free from the tyranny of the enemy. The crew of Misfortune would play a crucial role in the final victory, their bravery and determination inspiring generations to come. And as the people on the ground waited with bated breath for news of the mission, they knew that they would always remember the crew of Misfortune, their courage and honor a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. The hours ticked by, each one stretching out into an eternity as the people on the ground waited for news of the mission. The tension was palpable, the sense of uncertainty hanging in the air like a thick fog. But then, suddenly, the sound of engines could be heard in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. The people on the ground looked up, their hearts racing with anticipation, as the B-17s came into view. They were returning, their mission accomplished, and the people on the ground could sense the excitement and relief emanating from the planes. The B-17s landed safely, their crews pouring out of the planes, exhausted but exhilarated by their experience. Captain Fenton was the first to emerge, a broad smile on his face as he was greeted by the cheering crowd. The mission had been a success, the enemy target destroyed, and the crew of Misfortune had played a crucial role in the victory. The people on the ground cheered and clapped, their faces filled with joy and relief, as the crew of Misfortune was hailed as heroes. The war was far from over, but for now, the crew of Misfortune could bask in the glory of their victory, their bravery and determination, an inspiration to all. The days that followed were a blur of celebration and activity, as the crew of Misfortune was hailed as heroes. They were interviewed by reporters, their story told and retold, as the people on the ground looked on with a sense of awe and admiration. The crew of Misfortune had faced down the enemy, and they had emerged victorious. They had flown into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they had destroyed their target. The war would be won, and the world would be free from the tyranny of the enemy. The crew of Misfortune would play a crucial role in the final victory, their bravery and determination inspiring generations to come. And as the people on the ground looked on, they knew that they would always remember the crew of Misfortune, their courage and honor, a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. The story of the crew of Misfortune would live on, a testament to the bravery and determination of the men who flew the B-17. They had faced down the enemy, and they had emerged victorious. They had flown into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they had destroyed their target. The war would be won, and the world would be free from the tyranny of the enemy. The crew of Misfortune would play a crucial role in the final victory, their bravery and determination inspiring generations to come. And as the people on the ground looked on, they knew that they would always remember the crew of Misfortune, their courage and honor, a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. The legacy of the crew of Misfortune would live on, a reminder of the bravery and determination of the men who flew the B-17. They had faced down the enemy, and they had emerged victorious. They had flown into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they had destroyed their target. The war would be won, and the world would be free from the tyranny of the enemy. The crew of Misfortune would play a crucial role in the final victory, their bravery and determination inspiring generations to come. And as the people on the ground looked on, they knew that they would always remember the crew of Misfortune, their courage and honor, a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. The years would pass, and the war would finally come to an end. The crew of Misfortune would return home, their mission accomplished, and they would be hailed as heroes. They would be remembered for their bravery and determination, their courage and honor, a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict. The legacy of the crew of Misfortune would live on, a reminder of the bravery and determination of the men who flew the B-17. They had faced down the enemy, and they had emerged victorious. They had flown into the heart of enemy territory, their bombs at the ready, and they had destroyed their target. The war would be won, and the world would be free from the tyranny of the enemy. And as the people on the ground looked on, they knew that they would always remember the crew of Misfortune, their courage and honor, a beacon of hope in a world torn apart by conflict.